Hey there fellow creators, Ben here from Cinder Studios, and this week I want to talk about found wood supports. Really unusual stuff that you can just pull out of the woods, out of nature, out of wherever you happen to be pulling it from, and prep it for painting. Which is what we're doing this week with this big hunk of wood I pulled out of my backyard. Stick around. So I was doing some heavy trimming of the big tree in my backyard, and what I thought was going to be just a big log ended up being a big piece of a log because the ants had gotten into this and just ate through it quite a bit. So this is like 1/4 of what would have been like an all the way around piece on this log. And as soon as it kind of broke loose, I looked at this and I was like, I bet I could paint on that. Now, this obviously, because it, came right off of a tree and has some, insect damage, and these white sections here are actually mold. The first thing we have to do with this to prep it for painting is to clean it rather thoroughly. Now, it has been drying in my house for about 2 weeks, but it needs a little bit more TLC than just, slap some acrylic medium on it or gesso. So the first thing I'm going to do is hit this with some bleach water and a scrub brush and really kind of scrub this thing down. Make sure it's very well disinfected. So with some bleach and some nice warm water, I'm going to go ahead and just give this a nice little bit of a scrub here. The bleach obviously will pull off any of those mold areas, as well as just cleaning the wood, disinfecting it, all that stuff. It's also going to remove a lot of the real loose areas of the bark, anything that, anything you'd have a little bit of a problem of messing with, or what might break loose if you painted it a little bit too quickly. Now, I don't want the bleach to sit in here for too long. I don't want it to soak in and change the color of the wood. I'm just looking to pull off those impurities. Now, while I won't be painting the backside, it does have quite a bit of mold on it. I'm not going to scrub this as hard, but I do want to have it disinfected at the very least. If you can, it would probably be best to do this outside, but it's currently dark out, so I can't. And then once you're satisfied with the scrub, go ahead and just rinse everything off. Now, obviously, since we just soaked this in water and coated it in bleach and all this stuff, it's not going to be dry enough to do anything else with it this evening. I'm going to call this step 1, and we'll pick back up, or quick cut for you guys, but an extra day for me. I'm going to let this, wrap this up in this towel here. Make sure it can absorb as much of the excess moisture that it can. And by tomorrow, if not tomorrow, then 2 days from now, I'll be able to come back to this and we'll be able to actually give it our first initial sort of sealing and priming layer. Okay, day 2, and we are definitely dry enough. Now, I actually took the liberty of seeing a couple of spots on here that still had some of the white mold, and I just took a little bit of a knife and scraped those off. Now, in theory, I could clean this off a little bit more than it already is, but I do want to maintain some of the raw, natural energy, so to speak, of this individual piece. So a lot of the black spots I could scrub way down and get off there, but I want to keep some of that on there. Mostly I was just worrying about disinfecting the whole thing. Now, for our second pass, the goal here is to do just a little bit of light sanding. Now, for my preferred method for especially a weird support like this, would be one of these foam sandy blocks. You can buy these at your local hardware store probably. Alternatively, I found this method to be pretty cool. Just grab a regular piece of sandpaper and put duct tape on the back. This gives you a little bit more flexibility and stiffness, but not so much that you can't then like also curl and curve the paper itself. So I'm not looking to sand everything, but enough, especially on this sort of front section, the flatter area that I know I'm going to be painting on. I want to be sure that I'm giving a bit of a sanding to as well. Now the purpose of this sanding layer is primarily to give our what next layer will be the seal coat a little bit of something to stick to. Now you don't necessarily have to give it something to stick to, but again, especially for whatever surface you're going to be painting on, that much at the very least should be sanded. So what's great about this foam sanding block is as you push on it, it kind of contorts and conforms to the surface itself, so getting into some deeper grooves or anything is really not that challenging. Just kind of smoothing out the rough edges. Now some of this I have bark still showing here. I don't want to sand it to the point where this is breaking off. Some of it already is because of the bleach layer and everything like that, but I'm just looking for that bare wood sand. That stuff I'm going to be stabilizing with our next layer. Again, working on that back side where there's, you know, a lot more of the where the ants have gotten into. Again, I'm not looking for much, just a little bit of a level, surface level area. I could sit here and sand off every little segment, but that's not the goal. The goal is to maintain the rawness of the wood and just give ourselves a little extra finesse for our next and what will be the first layer of acrylic medium. Now you could just wipe this off with a rag, but I prefer a little canned air to blow that dust out of the crevices. And we are finally ready for our first sort of acrylic prep coat. This is probably the one layer that even if you decide to not gesso the piece or not like really prime what you're painting on, you have to do this regardless. So for this, I would recommend some acrylic fluid medium or some sort of a soft gel. For this particular layer, I am going with some GAC 100, which is Golden's version of their acrylic primer and extender. Okay, so I'm going to be using a roughly 1-inch brush to cover as much of this wood with this medium as humanly possible. Thankfully, I have another bottle of this since this one is at the end of its rope. But I am looking to totally seal the wood surface with this medium. This is a very thin coat, by the way. Any other wood panel, pre-bought otherwise, that the wood is very thin, like a plywood or like a, you know, a pine, an oak, whatever, what have you, I would not do like both sides of that. But for this particular coat, I want to seal everything. I want to seal off any impurities in that wood and make sure that even if I have to sand it back, that I am sealing away any impurities here. Now for, again, a wood panel, similarly, you wouldn't have to do this, and I would not recommend, again, like doing both sides in any capacity, because that wood needs to breathe. It needs to be able to warp and bow and bend. But in this instance, we are trying to just really isolate the wood layer from the paint layer. And if you're buying like a wood panel from, you know, Blix or Michaels or something like this has already been done to the wood. This is essentially a treatment layer for the wood to be sure that your paint in the wood, while the wood will absorb the paint to some degree, it's not going to soak into the grains and the fibers of the wood. Also, any impurities that are going on, as I mentioned, like there's all these tiny little holes where the ants got into, and especially when we hit the other side of this, I want to work all of this into all of these little grooves and just seal away any issues that I would have with this moisture. So again, you can use like, you know, an acrylic fluid medium, which I personally would recommend. Although, you know, something like a gloss gel would also work just as well. But really, we're just looking to seal as much of that wood surface as we can. And we will, I would probably say, I would recommend 2 coats of this with whatever you're doing. You know, if you're trying to preserve the bark up here, I'm going to be a little lighter with my strokes. I'm not going to scrub in the way I'm doing up here with the more exposed wood. You know, that stuff I can be a little bit looser with the brushwork with. But I'm trying to get just into every little crack, every little crevice, anything that could, in theory, pop loose. Or, you know, anything that even like the moisture of thinning your acrylic could get into. I'm just trying to seal as much of that away as I can. Okay, day 3, and we are front and back completely sealed and ready to go. Well, almost ready to go. So one thing I actually noticed is the application of the gel medium mixed with some of the sawdust, so some of that is actually visible, but luckily that's only on the back side. On the front side, we've got a nice smooth surface that at this point we could, in theory, paint on. But there's a lot of little imperfections here that I still want to take care of. Most notably, a couple of deep gouges where there's big pieces of missing wood, and this mark here, which I did with my chainsaw, which I definitely need to smooth out. So for this, I would recommend some sort of an acrylic gel. Now you can use a softer gel for this, but a softer gel, in my experience, has the problem of relaxing into any individual, divot or anything like that, and it kind of smooths itself out, in which case you have to do like 3-4 layers of it to really kind of fill that hole in. In this case, I'm going to be grabbing some extra heavy gel so I can hopefully minimize the shrinkage happening with the gel itself for all of these small holes and things like that. Now obviously I'm not going to do absolutely every mark. I could fill in way out here, but I don't plan on painting way out here. I'm planning on painting just kind of in the middle eventually. So I'm mostly just looking at a couple of those major imperfections. Tiny little holes where the ants were boring in, any major cracks like this one up here, I'm going to spread that gel into. But other than that, that's all this really needs. Now looking a little closer, you can see those holes a lot more. One here, there's a bigger one up here. That I'm probably going to fill as well. All these tiny little holes around here as well. That big divot. Now I will note that you can use like a molding paste or other texture paste for this, but I'm really trying to maintain the look and feel of the raw wood. Again, I also could have stained the wood before I did the initial steel coat, but I really want to make sure that it's as much as sort of the raw initial wood layer is there. So I'm taking this nice thick gel, I'm just smearing all that into these big open holes, and then scraping that surface clean with the knife. And these, like most of these layers, I'm gonna give like a whole day to dry to be sure all of that is dry and fully dry and everything like that. Just really working on filling in those bigger gaps with that gel. Now you might wonder, can I do this with the thinner, acrylic primer? You can. It just takes, a lot longer and takes a lot more layers to do it. So I would recommend getting yourself some thicker gel or paste or something that takes a lot of the guesswork out of this. In theory, if you, really are on a budget, you could also do this with just like some joint compound or off-the-shelf wood filler. But again, once again, we're trying our best here to maintain the overall color and shape of the wood without doing too much overall fill work and damage to everything like that. But since this wood was pretty heavily eaten up by ants, I have to fill in a lot more areas than a cleaner piece of wood might otherwise not necessarily need. And once you get a few spots filled in, you can take, a rag, a Kleenex, a paper towel, something like that, and just kind of smooth out those areas. To be sure you don't have too much of that fill-in hitting anywhere else. And you're just filling in the areas you need. As I just mentioned, this piece of wood is pretty gnarly. It's got a lot of imperfections, a lot of things that I'm needing to smooth out before we are ready for any kind of paint layer. But you'll always end up thanking me later if you do a little bit of extra prep work now. To be sure all of those tiny imperfections are filled out. The last thing you would want is your paint to soak in or shrink into these spots later on, causing, ripples or caves, crazes in your paint film, which otherwise would be a problem. Need quite a lot more gel to fill in. The big gouge from my chainsaw might need a second treatment once this dries, because I'm really kind of having to layer that extra gel in there. But the good thing about using the gel rather than a paste is this will dry clear, and we won't lose that natural color of the wood. Once I get all these filled, I'll let this dry overnight, and we'll come back on this again tomorrow. Likely giving it a final sanding layer, and then either hitting it with some clear gesso, black gesso, white gesso, whatever color gesso you want. But the goal really right now is just to fill in those deep gouges, and to be sure I have a nice smooth surface to paint on. So another overnight dry, and interestingly, some of the deeper wells here with that gel actually have not dried underneath the surface level. You can see that because they're still white. But despite using a heavier gel, all of that did soak down and soak in and shrink back. So we're going ahead and need at least one more layer as anticipated. So I'll just keep working that in with the knife, giving it 8 to 12 hours to dry, coming back with another pass and doing it again. This is one of these methods, especially for a really gnarly piece of wood like this, that you really kind of have to not be like, I know exactly what I'm going to paint on this tomorrow. It's like going to be like, I might be able to paint on something on this. But if your goal is to set this up in a day, not going to happen. A found wood support like this needs a lot more time and finesse to get ready to really be ready to paint on it, and not have any problems down the road with longevity and, paint chipping off, stuff like that. You want to be sure that you're really prepping that surface well. And something like this, again, takes just a little bit more time and a little bit more patience to get up to a working level for any given painting, acrylic, oil, or otherwise. Okay, so it's been a couple of more days, and as you can probably see even from here, the couple of those spots that I had that heavier fill-in with that needed a few more layers than I was anticipating are actually still a little bit white, which means the surface is dry, but underneath it, that underlying paint is probably going to remain wet for a while. But we are okay to work on it. I just want to point that out. Now, at this point, we could just go straight into painting. It is fully prepared, and it's got enough gel coating on this that there isn't really much of a problem with this. However, it is very glossy at this point, and I'm not huge on starting my painting with a glossy finish to anything. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab that duct tape coated sandpaper, and I'm actually going to sand this back once again. Now you might be thinking, well, that's going to be weird. You're going to take all the primer layers off. Everything we did up to this point has at this point soaked into the wood as much as it needs to, and we've just been working about smoothing out that surface. Everything from here on out is strictly more of the primer layer, and I'm certainly not going to apply any gesso to this with it being so smooth. I definitely want to sand that back, give it a little tooth so that gesso can also stick to the surface a little bit better. So the reason I'm opting for this, just the loose sandpaper this time, is specifically to get into all of these little cracks and crevices a lot easier. And it's really going to allow me to be very precise with how I'm sanding. Now, obviously, we don't want to sand back the areas where we filled in the gaps. Obviously, I'm going to be going a little bit lighter over those areas. But I'm really looking to remove that heavy sheen that we've got going on from the gloss and semi-gloss gels that I was using. Once again, something like wood filler or wood glue would work. I'm just trying to keep a more consistent professional and archival quality to the whole project. Okay, so with that sanded back, I'm ready to apply gesso, or in theory I could go up to and grab the GAC 100 one more time. A lot of times for a piece like this, I would opt for clear gesso. Clear gesso is a great option. It keeps things mostly clear and transparent, but gives a little bit of a more matte tooth to the whole thing. However, considering how gnarly this piece of wood is, I'm actually going to opt for some black gesso on top of this and really kind of isolate exactly where I want to paint. My vision for this, if I manage to stick with this idea, I don't know if I will or not, but I was thinking about this, like this feels like a fun like panoramic laying out under the stars in the grass and like looking up, so you have like all this dark grass that maybe comes up in an arc pattern, sort of like semi-fisheye lens. And then like a wild Milky Way kind of star field in the back. But that's just the thought. Like, you know, a piece of wood like this comes off the tree, you think about laying in your backyard. So that was my thought for this. And if I'm doing anything with space, I definitely want to start with a black gessoed support. Now for gessoing, I would normally grab a nice big brush for this. However, because again, pretty gnarly wood here, very, a lot of different areas of shapes and stuff, I'm actually opting for just a smaller one for the sake of, again, precision and control for exactly where I'm putting that surface. So for this, again, we're just, as you would apply gesso, nothing too crazy here. But once I get up like to the bark and some of the areas on the edge, I'm just going to feather that out. And already managed to get a bunch of black gesso on my thumb. Look at that. The gesso layer, of course, will also allow you to see a lot of those gaps more, especially if you didn't fill in enough. I've been prepping weird supports long enough, though, that any of those imperfections should be relatively minimal. Yeah, most of this is okay. I'm probably gonna feather it out a little bit right here because I didn't fill in everything on this edge. So I'm just going to feather that out to that side to still show some of that wood. We filled all this in. I want to definitely cover all that right up to that edge. Obviously, unlike my other paintings where I wrap the painting sort of around that edge, it's not really possible or practical to do so for a piece like this. There's something really unique, too, about painting a nature scene on a piece of wood, because it sort of forces you to think about the subject matter a little bit more, and what would feel like a big cityscape on a piece of wood wouldn't really make a lot of sense, at least not to me. Yeah, so this bark I'm not going to paint over. I'm just going to kind of wrap that gesso around there. And same thing here. I didn't fill in any of this, so I want to taper it off roughly by the time I get to there. In theory, I probably shouldn't have gone as far to that edge, since all of this is going to make the entire composition feel a little asymmetrical. But that's also a unique point of interest. You talk about like balance in your piece, like make sure the colors are balanced, or you know, different things like that. compositional balance. Well, compositional balance, especially when you're working on a found wood support, also needs to be taken into account. So I'm just going to feather that out over there. Might be able to go up to at least this edge, but leaving that underlying gnarlier wood underneath. And obviously with a big giant gesso brush, this level of a little bit of a precision gessoing wouldn't really be possible. So just opting for a flat brush works just fine. Yeah. Might have to go back and fill that hole in. And then there's a little bit there. So we kind of have this little bit of a broken piece coming around the bark. Like so. And that, and because we did all that other prep work, we don't need like 8 layers of gesso in order to, smooth everything out. We can just stick with the one because, this is just acting as a general primer coat on top of all of the other prep work we've already done. Smooth out a couple little areas there. And there we have a fully gessoed piece of found wood. So there we have a found wood support, fully prepared and ready for painting, which I'm not doing right this second. But this was really a video about how to get something that's a pretty gnarly piece of wood that you find, in your yard or out walking around. Anything you want to paint on, you absolutely can. So whether I keep it, horizontal like this, I maybe able to turn it up and do a vertical piece. This just becomes a whole nother extra panel support substrate, canvas, if you will. Any canvas is a canvas if you let it be. And as long as you prep your surface well enough, you can paint on whatever you want for oil and acrylic. So while it does take a bit more work to prepare a found support for painting, I hope this process, as long as it was, and this is, again, it was a very unusual piece of wood, so it needed a little bit more TLC for that, but you can get it there if your desire to paint on it exists. Or you can just, go to the store and pick a piece of canvas off the wall. But what's the fun in that, right? You got to be able to challenge yourself and break the idea of the 4 corners of a traditional panel or canvas every now and then, and force yourself out of that box in order to paint something that is just a little off the beaten path. Keeps people interested and always makes for a fun piece. As always, if you enjoyed this one or learned anything, go ahead and hit the like button. Let me know your thoughts and comments below. And this has been from Cinder Studios, reminding you to keep on creating, stay inspired, and I'll see you guys next time.